Hey everyone, it's Amy Lynn Durham, and you're listening to Create Magic at Work. Create Magic at Work is on a mission to equip senior leaders with tools they need to be a true servant leader and actually understand what that means. Improve employee engagement, retain top talent, and transform your workplace culture to have less stress and drama. So, let's start making magic. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Create Magic at Work. We're kicking off season 2 with a very special guest. His name is Aaron Tabacco. He's an executive coach and the director of staff experience in the Department of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco. A former professor of developmental pediatrics, Aaron transitioned into his current line of work 3 years ago, becoming a thought leader in the development of holistic workplaces, leadership development, DEI efforts, and internal institutional workforce research. He's a highly skilled public speaker and communicator, having been featured at numerous public and private professional engagements in his areas of specialty. Aaron has several professional publications in the U.S., Europe, Japan, and online, and is a graduate of the UC Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute at the Berkeley-Hass School of Business. Additionally, Aaron has engaged in high-stakes healthcare and higher education conflict mediation for families and professionals over a 13-year period. He's a father of 3 young adult sons who live in Portland, Oregon, and he currently lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. So please join me in welcoming Aaron to the first episode of season 2 of Create Magic at Work. I met Aaron through the UC Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute. The minute we connected on Zoom, we had an immediate connection, and his amazing take on how to be present, truly present at a high level for someone else when they come to you in the workplace and divulge maybe sensitive information. His advice is unmatched in my opinion. So please take a listen and let me know your thoughts. Thank you to all the listeners who are following and listening to Create Magic at Work. We hit another milestone with the podcast where we're now globally ranked in the top 10%. So hopefully we'll continue to move forward and move that ranking up as we continue to support and spread the message of creating healthy workplaces. So take a listen and rate and review the show if you love it. Aaron, thank you so much for joining today. And I'd love for you to start off with just, taking it from there and sharing a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much, Amy. First, congratulations on this international ranking or what have you that you mentioned. I think that's a pretty exciting milestone. And congratulations on a second season of your podcast. I'm really honored to be here and to join you. I enjoy you so much. So this will be a fun day. Yeah, I really appreciate the introduction. All of those very nice things you shared is very flattering. What's a good place to start with more about me, do you think?
Well, maybe a little bit more about how you got here. And, I should share that Aaron and I met because we're both UC Berkeley certified executive coaches. And I just noticed Aaron's name as a presenter at the annual coaching conference. And I said, okay, I need to connect with him. And this is how the universe works. You attract people that are meant to be in your lives. And we hopped on Zoom together one day and it was just like, oh my gosh, it was like we'd known each other forever and we became friends. And what I would love for you to share, and the whole reason why you're on the show today, is because I was so impressed with your presentation on presence.
Sure.
And how to properly be present for someone else.
Right.
And if you could just share what led you to learning how to do that properly and maybe some tips for the listeners. And we can get deeper into it, because what really struck me was, as leaders in the workplace, which that's the main audience for Create Magic at Work, we often have individuals that come to us and share sensitive information with us. Not just an executive coach, like leaders, they have to take a sick call, right? That's sensitive, private information. They have to have conversations with individuals that just in general, they're sharing private, sensitive stuff with you. And my thought is, are leaders out there really equipped to handle these conversations? Because I know when I was in my mid-20s as a manager and people were disclosing things to me, I mean, full disclosure, I don't think I handled it in the best way I possibly could. So anyways, why don't you take off from there and share a little bit,
Sure.
riff off of that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, like most things that are skills and attributes, we develop them over our lifespan. One of the things I noticed about myself early on in my life was, for some reason, many people begin conversations with me, even total strangers, with the sentence, "I'm not sure why I'm telling you all of this." So there seems to be some sort of natural magnetism where people feel like they can open up and confide in me. And, the first couple of decades of my life was coming to kind of reconcile that this is a natural part of who I am, but that also, I should embrace that rather than find that burdensome. And the first career that I had, I grew up in the restaurant world. And, I was working from the time I was 12 years old, and then ran my own businesses for a number of years. And what was very interesting was that sort of natural disposition to hear people's stories, whether they were employees or coworkers, or just people in the general public, sort of took on that proverbial bartender role almost, where you hear everybody's problems and you lend a kind and open ear. And so there've just been these deep roots in my life where being invited into a space of presence has just consistently been part of my experience. But I think that really diving deeply into this attribute, and the skills related to it came when I changed careers, when I turned 30 years old. So it was almost 20 years ago. Actually, it was 20 years ago. And became a nurse, which is, to many sounds like a pretty significant career jump, but in a lot of respects, there were a lot of overlapping characteristics between those two paths. But I became a nurse, and as you mentioned in the brief introduction, went into specialize in developmental pediatrics. So I work with primarily children across my practice and their families who are experiencing, lifespan challenges and neurodiverse presentations of their kids. So these are kids who have significant and sometimes very severe behavior and or learning disorders and require, a lot of care. And so early on in my nursing career, I started specializing, but then I also went into education. And I was a nursing professor for, I don't even remember now, 12, 13 years. Teaching undergraduate and graduate nurses about sort of the fundamental practices of nursing, as well as some of those advanced pieces. And in my first semester with my students, I always made a point to try and convey that the way I saw my practice was that it was, for me, a spiritual practice, and that the very essence of nursing was presence. That all of these sort of fun, exciting things they're all dying to learn about, like, using needles and IVs and all the, embracing this complicated vocabulary with people was necessary and certainly helpful and therapeutic, but it wasn't the essence of what we did as nurses. So yeah, I think that's kind of what brought me to where I am today. Having to dive really deeply into skills and being present in situations over a very long time where the stakes are very high, where the circumstances are such that it isn't just a casual, "How are you today? Oh, I'm sorry you're feeling kind of down," but are much deeper, like, for example, when someone has just received a diagnosis that is very likely life-altering or maybe even fatal, or a prognosis that things are not going to go well for them, or a nursing student who is failing and must leave the program and has all of a sudden to deal with the fact that their life path is probably going to be very different now than they were planning on it being. So These are the kinds of things where moving into those spaces very consistently over and over and over again has definitely brought me to a place where I value very highly the skills of being present. And I think you're right. Most of us in our leadership positions, or even just in our lateral roles as coworkers, don't really have a lot of training or skill around being fully present in the workplace.
Yeah. What advice would you give to a manager, a leader, on presence when someone brings them some personal news that was unexpected?
Yeah. Well, of course, I think in a lot of our workplaces, there's immediately a tremendous amount of anxiety about that. A lot of that has to do with things like workplace compliance, HR law, respect, but also confidentiality, and, making sure that our colleagues or coworkers or direct reports are being correctly and adequately supported. So, all of a sudden the context is set up in our culture to be one where the receiver of whatever this news is that's being shared with us comes from a position of immediate provocation and anxiety. It's like, oh my goodness, what do I do with this situation? What is being asked of me? And unfortunately, the real challenge that comes with that is then it puts us in a place where the interaction is immediately in our minds about us and not the other person, because we are in a space where our own fight or flight mode is probably being activated. We're trying to think about all the implications of what someone might be sharing with us, and it cuts us off from actually being present for the other person, right? Because you're entirely in our own heads about what's happening. And our brain is filling with thoughts and monologue and worry and concern. So the challenge then is to figure out, how do you move from that space outward into being present for the other person as a sort of a co-creator of that experience for them.
Mm-hmm. So in SQ talk, spiritual intelligence, because every episode we tie that to me, you're saying that's acknowledging all of those feelings that come up because of the systems we work in right now, right?
Yeah.
And then recognizing, well, it's the awareness of your ego. To me, that's your ego rising up.
Right.
In SQ, it's a huge skill, understanding, creating an awareness of your ego versus your higher self. Mm-hmm. So you see all of those things you just described in SQ talk is your ego rising. Yeah. I'm scared. What does this mean? I'm in my head about me. Okay, this is my ego being triggered. Let me tell my ego to take a nap. My higher self has got this.
Yeah.
And now, how can I sit and be present and hear what this person is disclosing to me? Because it can be very traumatic at times for that person, whatever they're going through in their life. And oftentimes, like we already mentioned, it's leaders that hear all of these things and they're ill-equipped to be compassionate. For me, you don't have to be empathetic, because to me, empathy is taking on somebody else's stuff. For me, the real SQ skill is compassion. Can you be a wise and compassionate leader? And I'm curious, with you and all of this practice of really being called to truly being present for someone, how do we do that? Mm-hmm. And then how do we detach from the outcome?
Well, I think you really have taken us into a great place for discussion, Amy, because, you'd asked, well, what's your first piece of advice? And really my first piece of advice was, right, well, one, we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace because we've been programmed to respond negatively to the situation. And we need to jump into that awareness that you're talking about, that spiritual intelligence that recognizes, oh, this is my ego. I think one of the affirming pieces we can embrace in most situations that are occurring in our workplaces where this is happening, where someone is coming to us to call on us for our presence, is that whatever decisions need to be made and actions need to be taken, they don't need to be taken in that very second where you're receiving this news, that you will have time and space to react down the road and to really think about what's happening and chart the correct course. So that alone buys you a gap. And it's that gap that we can expand on. when I think about how I teach people to really be present in high stakes situations, or what are often called hard conversations, I tend to break it down into 4 sort of domains of thinking. And one of them first is to offer ourselves the grace and freedom that comes from realizing that understanding their situation is not even a realistic outcome, that it's really out of our reach. And I think that's kind of grounded in, the business world is very taken every 5 to 10 years with different sort of paradigms and speakers and writers. And, as I was a young entrepreneur in the 90s, Stephen Covey was a really big thing. And, one of his useful and true and profound teachings was that this idea that most people don't listen with the intent to understand, but they listen with the intent to reply. And I guess what I want to offer is I want to build on that a little bit, because in these kinds of situations where someone's bringing a situation that really you can't possibly fully understand, that statement is a little bit limited. So we can move into a place where we can move beyond understanding. And I think what we're talking about here is embracing the idea that we can be fully present and listen to bear witness, to simply be with that person in their moment of difficulty or suffering or grief, and not have to do for them. So that's kind of that first big piece, I think, is just freeing ourselves from the responsibility that we have to somehow understand everything and then fix it.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's almost like taking a backpack off, I felt like, when you were saying that, because when we are in leadership and when we are leaders that have good intentions, sometimes our knee-jerk reaction is to dive in and want to fix everything. And what is so interesting to me too, now that I'm thinking about it, one of the skills in SQ, I think this all comes up to me in these episodes, is being a wise and effective change agent. And part of the skill set of being a wise and effective change agent is you don't jump to quick fixes. You wait. You uncover the root issue of a problem. You take your time. And your advice is just so freeing to leaders because it removes that doing piece that we're always in and puts us in that space of being for a little bit.
Right. And I really think that's critical because, this is part of not even just our cultural programming at this point. What we're talking about is sort of the human brain and the biology of our neurological system and how we are wired to take in new information and immediately start to say, what is similar? What is different? How do I relate to it? And can I comprehend or understand it? And very often it's in these moments where we think we understand. We think that's even possible. And so once again, we move back into our ego and we're making it about us. And we're making assumptions that something is in fact very understandable and accessible. And the reality is that sometimes there is something that we can really relate to in someone else's story. I think of a team member who came to me many years ago and said that they were dealing with a cancer diagnosis and that they didn't want anyone in the workplace to know, but they needed at least one person to know so that they didn't feel alone at work and they would have a safe space. And, I was thinking about, what's similar about that? Well, my father lived and died with cancer. This was in that same time period that he was dying or had died, excuse me. So there was a lot of sort of freshness to that. And I was prone to think, oh my gosh, I think I can understand this. But the reality is, of course, no matter what may have been similar in their stories or their needs, there is this vast part of their experience, their thinking, and how it's affecting them that I can't even access. It's like an iceberg. What they're sharing is what I can see, and what I know is what I can see, that top 10% of the iceberg. But there's so much below it that it's not even possible for me to comprehend it. And, freeing myself from that sort of chain that I need to understand it allows me to set myself aside. It allows me to set aside the knee-jerk reaction of judging people for how they're responding to things, and just frees me to be fully with them in that moment. And that's another piece that it kind of automatically flows into like this second kind of big idea, I think, that goes with this, is acknowledging then that whatever they're experiencing, it's not your pain and it isn't your journey. It truly is theirs. Whatever they're sharing, no matter how it might evoke an emotion or strike a similar reflective note in you, it isn't you. You're not going through it. You are not physically experiencing it or emotionally or mentally experiencing it. So you can kind of self-assure or self-soothe that it's not your journey. You don't have to personally navigate it. Let's jump into that space and be fully present with that person because it's not triggering all this other stuff in me.
Hey everyone, Amy here. Are you looking to create a life with more inner and outer peace, regardless of the situation you find yourself in, and gain unexpected insights into your leadership strengths? You can expand your understanding of your leadership skills, like being a wise and effective change agent, servant leadership, and get tips to operate from a place of peace and wisdom with my SQ experience, which allows you to examine where you are today on developing the skills of spiritual intelligence. I'm a certified SQ21 coach, and I now offer a 3-month one-on-one SQ experience that helps you have less stress, more balance, and brings value and meaning to your work and life. If you're interested in joining me on this transformational journey and you're open to doing the work, please reach out to me and let me know that you want to get started on the SQ experience. You can go to createmagicatwork.net and click on Work with Me. That's me, Amy. Or you can just direct message me on any social media platform under Create Magic at Work or on LinkedIn under Amy Lynn Durham. I look forward to hearing from you, sending magic your way. Yeah. So, detailed question here. The story that you just shared where you had this individual disclose they had cancer, that could have gone 2 ways or multiple ways in the work world that I could see. A leader could have said, oh my gosh, I totally get it. My dad just died of cancer, which is not necessarily the way we want to go because that shines the light back on you. And you just said it's not your journey. What would you propose would be the reaction? Because I'm sitting here like, what do you say? What do you say? Like, what do you say to that then?
Right. Yeah. That's such a great question because honestly, the very next kind of major concept I try to teach my students, once we get them to kind of open up to the idea that, look, you'll never truly understand or comprehend it. It's not possible. It's inaccessible. It isn't your pain. It isn't your journey. Your therapeutic help or presence it's not going to have a negative effect on you. Then you get into this place where, but what do I do? What do I say? And my first rule of thumb, especially as you're building skill with really practicing presence, is to remind yourself that you're probably going to say it best if you don't really say anything at all. Now, that isn't to imply that we should be sort of completely withdrawn and stone-faced and not respond to what somebody is saying, but to be very, very careful with the use of our language, our verbal and our nonverbal language when we're, connecting with somebody, because those words can really destroy the space that's opening between you. This person's come to you with so much trust and need. And the last thing you want to do is say something like, well, buck up, little camper, or, how bad could it be? Or, pull up your bootstraps, or, oh, that happened to me. You'll get over it. There's like a million things we kind of have become these cultural archetypes of responding to people in situations that don't work. So often I try to remind people that they can move into very simple forms of simply acknowledging that space and that truth to be with them. Often when my first response when someone comes to me with really big news is, thank you so much for sharing that with me. And that sounds like a lot. And I just want to be with you in the moment. Let's just take a moment and let's sit with that news. and just create a space that may be quiet or reflective. Nonverbal communication can be really powerful. Being able to remain open and make eye contact that is comfortable without being piercing, empathetic and or compassionate, rather, as you would offer, without being completely undone by the news yourself. I think that those are ways that we can start to just create some open space. Where I think people really are tricky or find this really tricky has to do with the fact that we in our culture haven't been taught to deal with silence well. So the easiest way to point that out is just to say that the phrase awkward silence is something that people use often. What is awkward about it? What's awkward about it is what we're feeling because we expect that we should be saying something or fixing the problem or jumping in. And sometimes, we just have to learn that we have a relationship with silence that might not really be well-informed or very healthy. Again, going back to the years when I was teaching students of nursing, I would role model this very early in my classes. So these are first semester nursing students. And in my classes, I would be very challenging with them. I would really challenge them to bring forward high order thinking and offer questions early in these very first classes where no one would respond. And I actually really like that. I like it when nobody responds and then the silence gets long. I actually let it go longer than it should intentionally, or not should, I guess maybe longer than, as long as it takes for them to feel very uncomfortable with it and I can sense it in the room. And then I usually interrupt that briefly and say, I want you to know that I don't fear silence and that I'm interpreting your silence to mean you're really thinking about this. And I want to give you that space to do it. And so when you are ready, when someone's ready, then we'll jump into the conversation. But I'm not afraid of the silence. And it's very interesting how impactful that is to the students. They feel free and it makes them question, well, what is my relationship to silence? And I think that's where, maybe our tips and discussion here can go. It's just when you're feeling that need to respond verbally right away, that might be a call to you to think about your relationship with silence and what's really happening.
So good. And oh, wow. How much do we have to feel silence in leadership, in meetings, in the workplace? I mean, that uncomfortable, silent feeling. I mean, you can't have any silent gap, right? No right. Dead air. No dead air.
Yeah.
I want to say thank you so much for offering all of that. And I want to share, you did that with me. When we first met, we started talking and we hit it off. And I mentioned I had gone through some difficult moments in 2021. And you stopped me and you said, Amy, I just want to acknowledge what you've been through. And I just want to take a breath with you. I'll never forget it. It impacted me.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I still think about that moment just because someone said, you didn't tell me that you understood what I went through. You didn't even ask me for details. You just said, I want to acknowledge what you went through and take a breath with you. As much as we have conversations, coaching clients, down the line, leaders, this, that, the other, that was less than 2 minutes of my life that I remember that moment. It was super impactful. So thank you for that.
Oh.
And for everyone listening, remember that. How impactful is something like that being instead of doing when someone is sharing difficult things with you as a leader? So thank you for sharing all of that. So before, I have 2 things that I do with every guest. Did you want to add anything else to what you said before we get into the final 2 parts?
Well, I just honestly wanted to say thank you. That was really lovely to hear that was a really impactful moment for you in our conversation, and it's something that really stuck with you. I always just feel like when I respond in a situation like that, I'm just trying to honor the space and honor the trust that someone's placed, in me and sharing something, that's deep and personal. And again, it kind of goes back to what we started with, which was this idea that we don't need to always listen to understand or reply or respond, but we can listen to bear witness. And really, that's kind of what I try to do in those situations, is just truly be a witness for them in their grief or suffering or loss or difficulty, because it conveys to someone that they're not being judged and they're not alone. And that is incredibly, incredibly powerful as a leader, to be able to have, the team you work with, your direct reports, your lateral colleagues, the people you report to, know that you can create a space that is so safe that they can share their ideas, their thoughts, their vulnerability, and not just in situations like these, but even in situations where you're brainstorming and someone needs to bring a new idea forward to the team, or challenge an existing process or paradigm, or say, I need to put the brakes on this meeting because I think we're going off the rails. It's one of those things where if you can really just move into a space of bearing witness through your listening and presence, being that present really just reinforces, like I said, the fact that you're not judging someone, so it's safe. And that is so freeing. So yeah, thanks. I appreciate you saying all of that, Amy.
Yeah, and thank you for offering that. We're really the overarching theme here to me is we're talking about polarities and being able to hold opposing energies in the same space. It's complexity of thought and perspective taking and balancing doing and being in our lives, especially in the workplace where we hold high responsibility to me to do that. And we typically are on the doing side, and it's at a much higher percentage than the being. And if we could balance that, I think that would move us into that quantum leadership space that you're talking about, where we have innovation, inspiration, people sharing in meetings, etc. So on that note, what is your view or definition of servant leadership?
That's an interesting question. This was, kind of a concept that, again, was pretty popular in the 90s, the early 90s, this idea of a servant leader, which was sort of shaking up the corporate world a little bit and making people think about that. And kind of preparing for our discussion today, I gave some thought to, what does that really mean to me, servant leadership? I think it's really fair to say that I've always attempted to practice, as my leadership style naturally grew over the years, to be very servant or service oriented. But your question made me think about, well, what are the dimensions of that? What are the skills of that? I think one being, like we're talking about today, practicing presence at a really high level really facilitates the ability for us to be in service to those that we lead. So there's that piece. I don't need to belabor that anymore today. I think also one of the concepts that really occurs to me that's tricky about servant leadership is that I think sometimes there's this idea that it means the relationship dynamic is once again hierarchical, but in a reverse situation, that, we place the other at a higher level in some way than we are. But I don't know that that's really true. I think, the service that I think I'm really trying to provide to somebody that I care about in my workplace is more about being in service to truth. What is really true? And it's not necessarily servant and served in that context, but more, I feel like I'm a steward of the space and a steward of truth. So what do I mean by that? I think what I mean is that very often, people come to us in situations where we aren't really sure how to act. We don't really want to deliver hard news. We don't want to say things that might be hurtful. I think feedback situations where we're expected or people are requesting it is probably a great space to think about servant leadership, because you move into that space, you're responsible for leading this individual by giving them some feedback. And, you're going to give them feedback about things that are going well and things that are not going well. And I have seen leaders, I've written a whole series about this because leaders really struggle with that, giving authentic feedback. But I think that that's what I mean when I'm talking about the connection between servant leadership and honesty or truth, is that you really have to commit yourself to the service of the other person and ensuring that they have honest, authentic self-reflection about what they're doing and where they are, so they can actually authentically move forward and progress. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah, you made me think a lot about different aspects of servant leadership. And I guess those were the two things. For me, was presence and my relationship to truth and honesty and authenticity when working with people.
I love it. Practicing presence at a high level, practicing. That was something that really stuck with me. It's a practice, right? And we shouldn't beat ourselves up if we're not there. And we're going to have you back because we're going to have to dive into your take on how to give authentic feedback and live in truth. So definitely want to get into that a little bit more. So final piece for all my guests, I pull a message from the universe for you from my journal prompt card deck. Let's see here. And it's also for the listeners. Oh gosh, there's this card jumping out. What are you getting? Oh, Aaron. Okay, we got motivation.
Oh, right.
And we got the little turtles going into the ocean on the art
very
piece
nice.
there.
I love it.
So the affirmation for motivation is, I stay mentally strong when faced with adversity. I mean, we were just talking about all of these things, right?
Yeah.
Knowing that success is the only possible outcome. So I stay mentally strong when faced with adversity, knowing that success is the only possible outcome.
Absolutely.
Okay, 2 questions. I'm going to pick one here and we'll post this later.
Sure.
I'm going to give you this one. What actions can you offer advice for? What actions can people take that can move them out of their comfort zone? Or even for you, what are you thinking? What actions can you take or implement that will move you out of your comfort zone? Give some inspiration there.
Yeah, I've had so much practice with this the last 10, 11 years of my life. My immediate response comes from a wonderful teacher who I've not met in person, but is really quite famous and a well-published author named Pema Chodron, who is an American Buddhist nun, which was something I didn't know existed. And now I've learned that in the last decade, but a prolific writer and teacher. And, when I was going through very difficult times 11, 12 years ago, and having to really figure out how to navigate that, one of the things she taught me that was really profound is that nothing ever leaves us until it teaches us what we need to know. And that was a huge wake-up call to me in terms of how do I deal with the difficulties I'm facing, because we live patterns and those patterns tend to repeat over time. And we wonder, why is this happening again? And how do I get through this? What that opened me to was a totally different way of approaching adversity. And it has made me a very fiercely courageous person in the skill of turning 180 degrees into the storm of my adversity and going deep, sitting with it, being present for it, not interrogating it, but approaching my own response, my own grief, my own anger, my own fear, whatever it is that I'm experiencing that's causing this adversity, approaching it with curiosity, honesty, gentleness, but not running away from it, right? It's been this reprogramming of fight or flight mode, and moving into a space of turning into it, embracing it, and seeing what it has to teach me. Because Amy, we don't want to keep having to have the same lesson, right? Over and over and over again.
Yeah, you just reminded me of that quote, lessons will be repeated until they are learned.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it, right? It's nothing ever leaves us, but until it teaches us what we need to know. So I guess the distillation of that is I've become an avid student of adversity. So I might not necessarily like the fact that I'm going through a hard time, but I've learned to turn into the storm rather than try and hide from it or flee from it.
I love it. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So if anybody listening wants to connect with you and have you be present for them in any way, that was our big, how can they reach out to you and get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, I think, I'm increasingly present on LinkedIn the last several years, and that's a very common forum for, I think, probably a lot of your audience. So it's easy to find me at Aaron Tabacco, Tabacco. I don't think there are many of us in the world. It's a very unusual name. So feel free to reach out. I'm very happy to connect with you there. Or if that's difficult and your followers here, listeners, are already connected with you, of course, I think you're welcome to pass on that connection and make a new link for between us. I'm open to that.
Yeah. And we'll put all of your information in the show notes.
That's great.
So anyone listening can read that and they can reach out to you as well. So Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. I was very excited to have you because I think this is something that everyone needs to hear that's in a leadership role. And thank you for sending magic to the listeners today.
Well, thanks for creating magic with us, right? That's what you do. You are definitely a magician.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Aaron.
You're welcome.
Hey everyone, it's Amy here. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Create Magic at Work. And please come back often and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Keep joining us for more exciting episodes where we help you transform workplace culture to systems that create less trauma and stress and have high productivity and profitability. You can get your own tools for the workplace at createmagicatwork.net. I have a new Create Magic at Work, the journal that just released, and it invites you to reflect about different themes for work and your career. Each section of the journal contains a topic, an affirmation, and 2 prompt questions to help you journal your thoughts. Topics are like inspiring others, mentorship, expansion, and productivity. So connect with me at createmagicatwork.net. Also connect with me on LinkedIn under Amy Lynn Durham. Sending magic to everyone, and see you next time.